Okay, today we're going to be connecting the Raspberry Pi 2 to the internet, or rather, the internet to the Raspberry Pi 2. What you've normally just done is you've taken an RJ45 connection and connected your Raspberry Pi to your router, and you're done. But a lot of people have been asking questions about how to get the internet to be able to see your Raspberry Pi. And unfortunately, it's a little bit more complicated than just plugging it in. And it comes with a couple of different things you need to know too. The first thing you need to know is the warning. Doing this is going to put you at a security risk. Why are you risking this? That's the real question. If you have data that you don't want stolen, then you should probably seriously consider what you're about to do, because making this yourself makes you way more vulnerable to attack. So rule number one here for this video is don't blame Pete. This isn't my problem, this isn't my fault. If you do it, that's great for you. If it doesn't work, and some hacker finds all of your information and all of your pictures all over the internet, that's your problem, not mine. The other thing about this is, I don't have your router. I don't know the answer to how to connect your router to the specific things that we're going to be doing today. That's why I'm going to use this notepad, so that I can show you in general what you need to do in order to do it. But I don't have the one that you have. I can guarantee it. There's thousands of different models that come out every year, and this has been happening for nearly 20 years. I don't have the one that you have, so don't ask me questions. Don't ask below. I don't know, and I will never know. You're going to have to use Google to figure out the answers that you need. I'm just going to give you that overview that should help figure out how to get the internet to point at your Raspberry Pi. Now, why would you want that? You'd want that for a couple of different things. You can check out my other videos so you can see some of the applications you might use in terms of getting onto the Pi and why that might be useful. For example, my garage door controller or my active light switch. That way you can control your lights or your garage door when you're not at home on the home network. But remember, test these things first on the intranet. Once it's working for your home network, then you can try applying it to a wider network. There's no point exposing yourself before you've even got these things working. Okay, the things you're going to need: a Raspberry Pi, or Raspberry Pi 2 in my case, the brand name and model of your router. Again, my router isn't the same as your router, so let's not even write it down. You're going to need a connection to the internet, so you can Google the brand name and model of your router with a list of instructions. Now, your router's admin password is not the same as your Wi-Fi password. So connecting a Raspberry Pi to your Wi-Fi is different than accessing your router. Typically, a router will be on 192.168.1.1 or 10.1.1.1, but it might be different than that. Again, I don't have your router, so I don't know the answer. If for some reason you can access your router, you don't have the right password, you can try resetting it, but if you do that, you could lose the account settings to connecting to the internet. Again, I'm not responsible for that stuff. The last thing that you can try, if none of this is working, is you can go to the shop and get yourself a new router. If for some crazy reason your service provider has decided that in your router they're going to disable certain features, you'll be part of a tiny minority, but that could totally happen to you. You can still pop down to your local store or onto Amazon and buy yourself a new router. They're not that expensive, and then you can write to your ISP and tell them that they're jerks. That's totally up to you. They've forgotten what the internet is all about, but that's their problem and your problem with them. And possibly the last thing that's worth noting here is what I'm about to tell you isn't allowed on a lot of servers. Some ISPs say that what I'm about to show you, connecting things to your internet, isn't allowed. And there's a good reason for it: the security vulnerability. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the Raspberry Pi as a server. I have a video to show you how to do that, and it's probably the most important part of this process, because the most important thing that you can do there is change your default password. If you go and expose the internet to your Pi and your password is Pi Raspberry, I mean, you're a colossal idiot. And how lame would it be if somebody cracked into your whole home system just because you forgot to change your Raspberry Pi password? That would make you an idiot. Please don't be an idiot. Pause this video now. Spend the time changing your password to something really difficult. And when I say really difficult, I mean something really difficult. It should have a couple of numbers, maybe a couple of exclamation points in it. It should be a non-English word, something that's not really simple. If you don't do that, you're just risking everything for almost no reason. Okay, this next part is the part where I need to get this notepad ready. You're going to assign your Raspberry Pi to a fixed IP address. And again, I can't show you how to do that because I have a different router. So you're going to log into your router on one of these numbers. So it's going to be 192.168.1.1 or 10.1.1.1. It could actually be a variation on those. Sometimes it's .2.1 or .1.2, or you'll have to figure it out yourself. And there's a couple of ways you can do it, but I'm going to leave that to somebody's instructions online that you can find. Especially if you've got the name of your router, you can just Google it. Once you're logged into your router, you're going to be looking for something like an IP address distribution table. So, IP address. And once you see that, you'll find a bunch of different things. For example, you might see 192.168.1.7 is an Android phone. Or 192.168.1.9 is your home PC. And then you're going to see one that says something like 192.168.1.11, and I'm using random numbers here. I don't actually know what your numbers are going to be, and that's going to be your Raspberry Pi. You want to now manage this number. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. I've had routers that do it in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes you just click on it, sometimes you click on this, sometimes there's a whole different page that you're going to find. But what you need to do is make a manual static connection. Manual static connection. Okay. Typically, there's another word you might look for, which is DHCP connections. That could be the other place to find it. Basically what you want to do is find your Raspberry Pi's locations and then give it a high number, one that you'll never see for anything ever else. So you want to give it a number that's easy to remember. Something like .101 would be easy to remember, or maybe .222 would be easy to remember. Something that you would find significance on that's, let's just give it some parameters here. Let's say it has to be greater than 100, but it has to be less than 254, because that's the top address. Okay? So you want a number in that range. Now that you've got a fixed IP address, we're going to look for something on the router that's called port forwarding. Now at this point, you're about to expose this to the internet. And again, I'm going to say it, make sure it's got a password. Your password should not be default at this point. You should have tested that everything is working using that address internally. From your other computers, you can access it by going to 192.168.1.222. You should already be testing this and making sure that it works and that it's not vulnerable. Okay, ready? We're going to talk about port forwarding. So for port forwarding, basically what we want to do is we want to have traffic coming in on the internet, going to your router. Then you want that headed directly to your Pi. We want web traffic, for this example, to be going through our router to our Pi. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into port forwarding, and we're going to add a port 80 instruction to point to 222. Port 80 is the typical port for internet traffic. When you connect to a website address, typically you're connecting on port 80. There are all sorts of different ports, and different ports on your router will open and close at different times. By setting port 80 to forward to 222, when someone goes to your router, they will, on the port 80, they'll be redirected to your Pi. Now let's say you wanted to add FTP access to your Pi instead. FTP access happens on port 21. If you wanted to do something like SSH connecting, that happens on port 22. You can open and expose these different ports to your Pi. You could even expose your ports to different addresses. So you could have a different Pi on your network, say 221, to another Pi just that does your FTP connection. For this example, let's just stick to port 80, because that's really what we want to talk about, exposing the internet, or the World Wide Web really, to a Raspberry Pi. So how do you figure out what the number address of your router is? That's actually really simple. You just go to Google and type in, what is my IP? And it'll spit you an answer straight back. Now, that number could be anything. Again, I can't tell you what it's going to be because only Google can tell you, because that's the traceback that will tell you your unique number. So if you've correctly configured your port forwarding, if you punch your IP address that Google's just given you into your browser, you should end up back on your Pi looking at the web server. And you're like, how cool is this? It totally works. You've got your router connected to port 80 to your Pi, and you're like, I'm done. I'm online. I know it. I know my IP address. The only problem is that most companies now, most ISPs, won't give you a fixed IP address, but instead give you what's called a dynamic IP address. And what a dynamic IP address means is that this address will be constantly changing. When I say constantly changing, again, it depends on your ISP. It could change every 15 minutes. It could change every 15 days. It's really difficult to know how often it's going to change, but doing something like restarting your router typically resets it and will give you a new IP address. They're dynamically assigned by your host in order to save on their IP addresses. But that's for another chat. All that you need to know is that your dynamic IP address is constantly changing. And because it's constantly changing, we need to add another step to this process. Now remember, things should already be working to this stage. If you haven't been able to see your Raspberry Pi on the local network, then you don't need this next part. If you haven't seen that you're able to connect to your Raspberry Pi when you punch in your home IP address, then again, you don't need to progress to this part yet. But once you've got those two bits working, next thing we're going to do is something called dynamic DNS. Now what dynamic DNS does, it's a really clever little tool that's built into your router that connects your router to a third box, a DDNS box, and it sends a callback saying, I get what you are. For dynamic DNS, this lets you put in a logical password or a logical phrase in order to access your router rather than punching in your IP address every time. Now this logical name isn't a .com address, or at least it's typically not a .com address. Typically, it'll be something that ends with something unfamiliar, like a .info. Sometimes you might even have a higher set, like ns01.info. And what you'll do is you'll put a username or something in here to make it logical. So let's say we're going to call this logical.ns01.info. What that means is when I connect to that when I put this string into my browser, it will contact the DDNS host. The DDNS host will know what our IP address is at home, and then it'll forward us there. So what you'll be able to do is to use a logical address instead of a bunch of numbers, and it'll be constantly updating. So how do we accomplish this? There's two parts that we need to do. Basically, you need to go first to your router. And in your router, when you're in the configuration, and again, this is why you needed your configuration password, inside your router, you're going to look for a DDNS tab or a dynamic DNS tab. And there, you should have a couple of different options. Now, there was one that most modems used, which was called DDNS. Now, Dyn has since changed to Dyn.com, but unfortunately, they've canceled their free service, and you have to pay to use them. What's even more annoying about this is a lot of routers had Dyn.com already pre-configured inside of them, so it's the only choice that you have. If you're lucky enough to not require Dyn.com or Dyn DNS, you can use any number of services. If you look up a quick Google on dynamic DNS, you'll find all sorts, like noip.com or change IP, which is the one that I use, .com. Now, I have no affiliation with either of these companies. What I do know is they'll keep trying to push you in a direction where you've got to pay for this service, but keep clicking on the free button and make sure that what you're signing up for is free. Soon enough, you'll be able to get through and be able to find all those crazy extensions. I just had a quick look here on changeip.com, and some of these extensions that you can get are like toowacky.com. So what you do is get your username there. Or another one is mefound.mefound.com. Again, it doesn't matter. You just need to be able to put this information into your router along with your username and password that you've signed up for on one of these dynamic DNS sites, and you should be able to use it. Let's just draw this out as it happens completely. Here is the internet. The internet will connect to your router. The router, through port forwarding, will connect to your Raspberry Pi. That's my version of a Raspberry. I hope you know what it is. This process happens through port forwarding. This process happens through dynamic DNS. And once you've completed that, you should be, with a logical name, able to access your Raspberry Pi. And just to add one more layer on top of this, once you've got your logical name.ns01.info, once you've got that string, you can then go to somewhere like 123reg or any of the other, I'm trying to think of other ones like GoDaddy, and register a .com address. So let's say you wanted something cool .com, you would then use one of these services to point that at your logical dynamic DNS, and that would allow you to type in somethingcool.com and have that find your Raspberry Pi. But again, and I'm just going to say it one last time, this exposes you to the internet. And exposing you to the internet carries all sorts of risks. So I just want you to think about it one more time before you complete this. Once you're visible on something like somethingcool.com, it's easy for an attacker to begin to attack your home server. If they're attacking your home network and gain control of your Raspberry Pi, once they've done that, they have access to everything that's happening. Once it's happening on your network, there's no way to get it out. Antivirus software can help, but modern attackers don't use that stuff. They'll find a vulnerability in something like your PHP scripts or something else on your Raspberry Pi, and once they've got access inside of your Raspberry Pi, all hell can break loose. And I just want you to be very aware of that as you're going ahead and proceeding with this. You should be really familiar with how to update your Raspberry Pi. Doing something like a cron update would be really smart. Also, it's really important that you start thinking about backing up your data. Because if somebody can access your stuff and can crack the code inside your network, you're in for a big shock. If anything that you have, even if it's as simple as your homework, if that has become vulnerable, it could change everything. And once you're vulnerable once you've been exposed once, that could be it. You could be infected for the next, well, forevermore. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video today. I'm sorry that it couldn't be more informative, but please remember, I don't have your router. I don't know how to set it up. So please don't ask below. If you're on a big ISP, like one in the States, like Time Warner, then you guys can share information with each other in the About section or the comment section below. That'll be cool for you guys to do, but don't ask me, don't pressure me to do this. And if somebody's attacked you, it's certainly not my fault. I try to be as clear about this stuff as possible. If you've particularly enjoyed this video, you can buy me a coffee in the About section below. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's create a little community around this video in the comment section and help each other. If you guys all have a certain type of modem or a certain type of router, these things get a lot easier when you have a group to handle them with. Or even if you just share your search terms so you can start to figure this out. Don't forget to check out my other Raspberry Pi videos. If you're going to do this, you might as well make something really cool out of it. And of course, I have a bunch of cool videos that would make some really cool stuff, like turning your lights on before you bring somebody back to your apartment. I'm not suggesting that's ever going to happen for us nerds. I'm just saying that if it does, it would be a cool thing to turn on a light switch with your mobile phone. You can check out that video now. There's other triggers and other cool things that you can do, or even just host your own blog. Thanks again for watching. Remember to give me a like if you enjoyed this video. Give me a dislike if you dislike this video. We'll see you again soon.